All right, let's hit, I'm gonna hit the live button. YouTube says going live. All right, so we are live now.
Perfect.
And I'm just checking, everything's cool, I think so. All right, well, welcome to another episode, well, the first episode of the live stream series where we're gonna be talking to recruiters from the Codecademy team and trying to learn a bit more about the interviewing process, what it takes, what it involves, and how to be ready for it. Without any further ado, Harmeet, do you mind introducing yourself and giving me a quick background of what you do at Codecademy?
Definitely. So Harmeet, I am a senior technical recruiter at Codecademy. And what I do is recruit specifically for engineering. Right now I'm working on some manager roles. I'm also working on some roles for our growth team, which is a new team, and our payments and billing team, which is also a new team. So all fun stuff. But yeah, that's a little bit about what I do. Full cycle recruiting here at Codecademy.
All right, it's safe to say that you know what you're talking about, basically, just on that quick introduction. So I think we're in good hands. All right, that's good.
I hope after 6 years of doing it, I know maybe a few things that'll help out today.
Okay, great. No, I mean, that's why people are tuning in and that's what they want to learn. So let's jump right into it. Let's get started with just a general sort of overview of what the interview process usually looks like for like a junior developer role, the kind of role that some of the Codecademy learners might be looking for as their first job when they're trying to break into tech.
Yeah, definitely. So I think in terms of what you can expect as someone who's new into development and you're doing your first rounds of interviews, you'll probably have some type of phone screen with a recruiter like myself. And then from there, you'll probably do a take-home challenge or a technical phone screen, depending on the company and how they do things. But for us, you have the option. So you could do a technical phone screen or a take-home challenge. And then after that, depending on the company, you might talk to the hiring manager before you do your final interview. But otherwise, you're doing a final interview. And so the final interview might consist of several different components, but usually there's like some type of hands-on component where you're doing some type of coding exercise. There is a component probably around debugging. There's probably going to be something around like system design and architecture, but that might depend on the company and the role itself too. And then you'll probably meet your hiring manager again, or your future manager rather.
And during this round, so during all these stages, like the phone screen interview and any take-home challenges or any technical interview calls, do you know if there's like a typical time range? Like I know that some of, especially when you're applying for the first time, it might feel like a very anxious, anxiety-inducing process that you talk to somebody and then for a week or days or 2 weeks, you don't hear anything back. Is there like a typical time range that people can expect? Like, okay, this usually takes 2 weeks. This usually takes a week. If you haven't heard back by week 3, probably not going to hear back at all. Is there like a time thing, or is every company different?
Yeah, that's funny because I just helped out a friend in this same exact situation. They're like, I haven't heard back from the company, but everything was going well. Like, what should I do? So really, it's very much situational and dependent on like what's going on with the company and the recruiting team. But I would say this, like, usually if you're doing well, you should hear back soon from the team, unless the team has told you like, hey, for instance, Codecademy, we were off from the 5th to the 9th, right, of July. And so if the recruiter has told you like, hey, there's some things going on with the team, we're making a few decisions, there might be a delay. And then there's a delay, there's some explanation behind it. But if there's not an explanation behind it, not a good sign. But you should usually hear back within, I'd say like a week or so is like a rough timeline estimate. Now, if it's a take-home challenge, sometimes that does take time to grade or get graded. And sometimes you need second opinions because sometimes the team wants to give that person the benefit of the doubt. And so they have another person grade it. So things like that do take up time. But I think a week is safe. Yeah.
I know that a lot of applicants might feel tempted to reach out to the recruiter or reach out to, maybe they network inside the company, maybe they got referred by someone or they know somebody already working at the company. It's a fair game if sometimes gone by, let's say a week and a half is gone by, like maybe you interview on a Wednesday and the rest of the week goes by, the next week goes by after. It's a fair game to reach out to the recruiter or reach out to somebody, whoever you contact, and say, hey, I was just wondering about this. Like, is there like a line of between being too eager and just following up?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question, actually. I would say in terms of following up, definitely follow up. That shows that you care about the position that you're being considered for, you care about the opportunity, and you just genuinely want to know how you did. If you're following up like literally a day after, a little too eager.
Okay.
Maybe give it a couple days, if not like 4 or 5 days, like a business week at most, and then follow up. But totally, like I think it's worth following up. In fact, I advise people, hey, if you don't hear back from me by end of day X day, please do follow up, because sometimes recruiters are inundated with a bunch of action items that they have to do, and they might forget to get back to you. So sometimes, if I'm going to be honest, that might be the reason behind the delay. So,
okay. No, yeah, totally fair. I just know that some people feel really anxious. Like, oh, I shouldn't do it. Should I? Is it good etiquette? Is it bad etiquette? Should I follow up? So it tends to be a question that a lot of people have. Going back to the process and the stages. So first step is the phone screen.
Yeah.
What is the phone screen? Somebody that has never heard of the process before, assuming starting from zero, what is a phone screening? What does it usually entail? And what should people expect of it?
For sure. So in terms of phone screen, if this is your first time doing a phone screen and you're just kind of new to doing interviews in general, I would think of it as like a chance to get to know each other, as cheesy as that sounds, but it really is. Like, it's a chance for you to get to know the recruiter who represents the company, as well as, get to know about the company. But also there's a part of it where us, the recruiters, want to get to know about you and your background. So I like to think of it as like a two-way street where there's time for both ends, both parties to ask questions. And so, yeah, I can dive into like what that typically looks like, but at a high level, that's how I would envision the phone screen there.
Okay. So if somebody, is there any like big no's that you can think of right away? Like, for example, I know that most people will assume things like, okay, it has to be a quiet space. I have to be able to answer questions. Like, I can't pick up this phone screen if I'm on my bike riding back home or something. Like, I'm in the bus and the phone cuts off. It's like, hey, I'm in the subway. It's gonna cut out. I'll call you back. Is there like a top three of, if you're gonna do a phone screen, you never want to do these things? Like, is there like a really clear cut, never do this?
Yeah, you'll be doing this time after time. You'll get calls where you find out new things that you should never do in an interview. Like, for instance, don't ever take your phone screen at the casino, because I've had a candidate do that, and there's like slot machines going on in the background.
Oh, wow.
So the point about noise, definitely put yourself in a place where, one, there's not much distraction for you personally going around. But two, not too much distraction for the recruiter or the person on the other end going around, because that could deter their performance in asking questions, right? So you definitely want to be in like a quiet environment. Make sure you have good service. I know that's not always feasible depending on your carrier, but if you can, try and be in an area with good cell service. That's a huge one. And I think too, just knowing that there is like an agenda from the recruiter, and then you have your agenda as well. So keeping a healthy balance there, because as much as you want to ask a ton of questions, like, there is also time for the recruiter to ask you questions as well. So sometimes people might forget about the time and they ask a lot of questions, and you get to the end of the call as a recruiter and you're like, I haven't really gotten to ask the questions that I want. So I don't know if this person is a fit. Right. So, just knowing that there's a balance between like the things that you're trying to gain from this phone screen, as well as what the recruiter is trying to gain. So
and I'm assuming that every company is a little different, but a phone screen probably serves like a specific purpose. Like you said, like it's a chance to get to know each other, learn more about the candidate. So from the perspective of the person applying for this job, is there some like general rule of thumb, things that they should be preparing for in this phone screen? Like, I know like all the cheesy questions like, why are you interested in this role? Or like, why would you like to work at company X? Or, tell me a situation where you do this, or why are you more proud achievement or something. Like, I know there's like a lot of cheesy questions that go through interviews, but is there anything in particular like that applicants should be prepared for? At least have, maybe not a script, but at least having in the back of their mind a good answer for, because these questions are very common.
Yeah. I would say like some of those questions that you mentioned aren't actual questions that I asked for a few different reasons, but I won't dive too much into that. I'll directly answer your question. So one question that I would definitely like just try and get like some type of confidence in is like being able to talk about an intro about yourself. So when I ask someone like, hey, tell me a little bit about your background, especially at a junior level, like tell me about your background, how you got into software development, and like, all of those details there. Being able to talk about that with enough detail, but not going too much into the weeds. So it's all about
rambling, basically.
Balance. Yeah, exactly. Because you don't want to go into the call about your intro, and then about 10 minutes into the call, you just finished your intro, and there's maybe like 20-ish minutes left. If I were to break down the call, like typically how I break down a call is there's about, I want to say 4 to 5 minutes on my end talking about the role, the company, what's going on. Then about, I want to say 15 to 20 minutes of questions from my end. And then I leave the rest of the time for questions for the candidate. Every phone screen and recruiter is different, but that's kind of how it's broken down. So you definitely want to prepare for like a good intro about yourself, as well as think about like, as you apply to jobs and you see different job descriptions, get a sense for what are some of the things that they're really looking for in this role, just from the job description. How can you do that? Well, you can read the job description and see, like, honestly, just keep tabs of what's mentioned the most in that role and what are they looking for the most of. A lot of the times that will be a good predictor of like, what are we looking for in the role? So be able to
sounds like the job description has like keywords and has a lot of details that will get you. So I know that you mentioned the phone interview and the technical interview. So is there so the phone interview, will you get asked any questions? Do phone interviews ever go a little technical or not at all? Like the phone interview is just not about that. Like, would you ever look at a candidate and ask them maybe to give you some specifics of the project they worked on or something? Is that something that you might have to be ready to talk about your work or your projects or your portfolio? Is that something that can happen in the phone interview?
Definitely. Good point. Depending on how junior they are, sometimes no, because they're, coming in from a boot camp. So they can talk about projects. Yes. But in general, I would say that is something I will ask, and most folks will ask. It won't be to the detail, or we won't want to get the type of detail that a developer would be looking for. But we are trying to get a sense of like, okay, tell me about a project you've worked on and how you may have, like, what was the problem you were trying to solve? How'd you go about solving it? What was the end solution? Right. And so through that, you kind of walk me through the journey of what you worked on, what you built, what's the like customer pain point it might have been solving, and the purpose behind it. And then like your process about how you completed it. In that, if you're able to answer that, that tells me a few things. One, can the individual break down technical concepts into more like layman's terms? Because although I am a technical recruiter, I'm no developer. So a lot of this, like, I know just through repetition and talking to engineers and developers, but a lot of the times I don't know the nitty gritty details of what people are talking about. So giving some detail, but being a little more generalizing with the details that you give helps to kind of paint the story, if you will.
So it
So
sounds like a phone interview. During the phone screening, you might not have, most people might assume that it's about your character and your person, and it really is, but it might be at 10%. It might, like, depending on what you're applying and who you're talking to and the type of recruiter, you should be able to talk some about your project. You can't just assume, no, this is not that kind of interview, I don't even need to worry about this. You definitely have to, like, at least not blank out completely if a recruiter says, well, I saw that you had this project in your portfolio, can you talk a little bit about it? And you don't want to go, yeah, let me pull up GitHub and look at it, I don't remember it. You don't want to do that, right?
that's a
Okay.
problem. That's a problem. If
Yeah.
you are having some struggle talking about the work that you've recently done, that's not a good thing. You want to
Okay.
memorize that like the back of your hand, because then when you're going into technical rounds, they're going to ask you, okay, you worked on this project. What are some of the trade-offs that you considered while you were building X, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to be really intimate and be able to talk about the different decisions you made and how you think about things and your thought process there. So to be
Okay.
asked that in the recruiter screen is like the precursor for further conversations you'll have if you do well in the phone screen with the recruiter.
And talking about technical interviews, is it fair to ask the phone screen recruiter about the technical interview? Like at the end of the, like maybe there's like a general Q&A at the end of the phone screen. There's like a few minutes left. Like, hey, you have any questions for me? We have a couple minutes left. Is it fair to ask the recruiter, hey, assuming this goes well and I go to the next round of interviews, can you walk me through what the technical interview is going to entail? Can you tell me a little bit more? Like, is that like asking too much? Does that come across as cheaty, a little cheating, or is it totally fair to show interest in the next round?
I think it's fair game, to be honest. You know,
Okay.
the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You never know. Some companies are very much for it. Codecademy, we do it. We give a little prep. We do candidate prep calls before every final interview too. So I would say ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. For a majority of companies, I would say every company has different stances
Mm-hmm.
on this, but I think it's okay to ask, and they can give you some details about the technical interview, which will help you a lot, because otherwise you're shooting in the dark there and you're
Right.
just kind of waiting for what's to come and you have no idea what to prepare for, which will probably make you even more anxious about the interview. So I think it's a good,
Okay. And do
yeah.
you have any general advice for prepping for technical interviews?
Definitely, definitely. So one, always ask so that way you can get some type of answer from the recruiter on what the prompt might be, what type of technical interview. There's different types. So you just want to be prepared as best as possible. Once you figure that out, I think it's always safe to say, like with, for instance, like a technical phone screen or any type of technical interview, there's going to be opportunities for you to ask clarifying questions, or you might need to ask clarifying questions. Say you're given a prompt and you're not given much instruction and you have to build out some system that's relevant to the company that you're applying for, right? At like a very bare bones level. You're probably going to want to know, like, okay, we're building this system. Who are the users? Why are they using this? You know, things like that, to get a better sense of like conceptually what you're trying to build. So then you can be a little more detailed about how you approach building that. So
Okay.
asking clarifying questions is huge. Do not be afraid to ask clarifying questions.
Mm-hmm.
The
I know
other,
that I've read online a lot that sometimes you get in the zone sort of thing, like somebody will throw a problem at you and you kind of like go quiet and just start typing, like coding. Like if it's a coding interview, we were talking about technical interviews in coding, you might have a share screen or something, you start coding and you don't comment on what you're saying, you don't do anything, you just kind of like go at it. And then the other person on the other side goes like, hey, can you explain what you're doing or the rationale behind this? So I know that that tends to be a no-no, right? Kind of like when you do a technical interview, be verbose of what you're doing, say your thoughts out loud, share what you're thinking, because the person on the other side can't read your mind. So you need to explain. So like if you make a mistake, they know where you were going for, and like it might save you.
yeah,
Is that fair?
I feel like you might have aced some technical interviews yourself, because that is spot on advice. 100%. You need to get in the habit of thinking out loud, exactly how you put it. And that's exactly what I tell candidates too. Like, they won't know what you're thinking unless you speak to it out loud. So just as you, like, even if you need a minute, like if they stump you with the question, you're like, okay, I don't know what they're asking me. At least tell them like, hey, I need another minute or two to get an answer to this, or like to think about this and give you an answer. Is that okay? And like, okay. So they know that you're taking some time to think about it. So thinking out loud is a huge part of it for sure.
Is that your go-to advice? If you're doing a technical interview and they ask you to do something that you're not super clear about, or something that you just don't know, what is it like a better way out of all the ways you can go about it? What's like the better way to say you don't know, or I need a minute to think about this? How do you express that in terms that don't, that they make you sound competent, but they still give you time to think?
For sure, for sure. Well, it depends on how unaware of the the topic you are talking about. If you completely do not know, flat out, I think honesty is the best policy, and just own up to it. Like, I'm pretty unfamiliar with this topic. If I'm going to be honest, I've never encountered it. If there's any saving grace, or if you want to have some type of saving grace in that situation, try and relate it back to another concept that you know, and see if there's some relationship between that concept and this new concept that you learned. And odds are the interviewers are going to be like, no, it's actually not like that. It's like this. Hopefully that detail that the interviewers gave you gets the wheels churning, and you can think about how that new concept is applied in this prompt or this interview. So
it sounds like a bit of an emotional wrap. It's sort of like you're doing okay in the interview, you hit a stump, and you want to wrap it into kind of like saying, I'm not familiar with this, but I am familiar with that, or like I have worked in the past with this other technology, or I have experience with this other framework that is similar but not quite the same. Maybe you can even ask, like, do you mind if I solve this in the framework I know, or maybe a different programming language or something? Like, the recruiter might say, yeah, sure, like just show me the general idea of what you were going for, right? Like, it might save you the fact that you can wrap it back into sort of like the positivity of, I do know, but not quite. Like, I'm capable of learning. I can overcome this.
Exactly. It shows that you're resilient. It shows that you're trying to make connections, because a lot about what we don't know is connecting it back to what we do know, so that we can become more familiar with things. So I definitely think everything you said is spot on. Like, it shows sometimes some type of resilience instead of, I don't know, and then that's it. And then it gets kind of awkward from there.
Yeah. So kind of like, I guess if you're going to say, I don't know, you want to follow with I don't know, but I could. Like, you want to show that there's an opportunity for growth, right? Like, because I know that a lot of recruiters or a lot of people in tech will always tell you, hey, we all start from the beginning. We don't know everything. Even senior role people are still Googling things. Don't worry about it. It's more about showing that you can learn.
For sure.
Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, for sure. Depending on the level of the role that you're interviewing for, I would say most of the time that's a fair statement. Once you get to like senior and staff, that's when you
need to know.
Yeah, you're a little you're more expected to know some of the things at that level, for sure. But considering the audience is more junior folks getting into software development, or their first or second jobs, like, there are probably things that you've learned or picked up on the fly at your current workplace or prior on a project. So you can also relate back to that instance where you had to pick something up on the fly, because you're not expected to know everything within, like the first couple of years of development. I mean, throughout your entire career, no matter how advanced you get, you're not going to know everything. So
I think that wraps kind of back what we were saying about how when you're doing the prepping for the interview, you want to have kind of like a story for everything, right? So like, you might want to prep, okay, I know this and this, but I'm a little weak on this. Like, maybe I'm a little weak on data structures. I'm a little weak on that, on algorithms. So this is how I'm gonna like get out of that if it goes, if it takes a wrong turn. Like, you can prep for that too, I guess, kind of like already mentally thinking of the story and how it's gonna go.
Definitely. I think it's good to just look at it from like what you're good at and what you're not good at. try to line that up with like, okay, what is the interview actually focused on? And then two, I think the other thing that's going to help is just preparing for it as much as possible, but also understanding the type of interview. Like some companies do really, really like practical interviews where it's more so flex like the day-to-day work that you're going to be doing, which Codecademy does that. But there are a good amount of companies that do a lot of like heavy data structures and algorithms types of interviews, super like complex,
very dry, theoretical. Nobody ever uses it except for interviews.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the acing your coding quiz, or what's that like book that's very famous, like that has all those types of questions. But anyways, yeah, there's a subset of companies that have interviews like that as well. So you definitely want to know what you're up against and understand what type of interviews this company does.
Okay. Last question before I let you go. I wanted to know if you have any sort of like common soft skill questions, something that people can prepare for just in general. You apply for a job, send your resume, so your cover letter, boom, you get a phone interview. You're super excited. All right, my resume worked. Cover letter is good. I'm going to get into this interview. What sort of soft skills questions you should be ready for? Like, is it like, general stuff like what does it mean to have to be able to work in teams? Like I have teamwork. What does that mean, right? Like, is there any? Can you give us some guidance on what soft skills mean and how you showcase those?
Yeah, for sure. I think in terms of soft skills and what that means to us, we kind of assess it throughout the interview. There might be targeted soft skills questions, but in general, like even, oh, tell me about a project you've worked on. I'm going to pay attention to how much detail they're giving and how verbose or not verbose they may be, right? But in general, I think in the soft skills questions, we're trying to look for, is this person a good teammate? Can they work well with others? When accidents happen, do they point fingers? Do they treat me with respect, right? Because sometimes you might be on a call and the person is continually talking over you, or they might have taken up all the time asking questions and then you have zero time to ask questions. And then you kind of don't have any time to assess what you're trying to assess. So I think those are kind of the main things that we look for. Is this person, a good person to work with in terms of like, do they gel well within the team environment? Are they respectful? And do they provide enough context and detail without going too much into the weeds? Now, in terms of how can that translate into a soft skills question? I mean, honestly, like, tell me a little bit about yourself is probably the most common soft skills question that is ever asked in a recruiting interview, whether it's tech or non-tech.
I feel like a common one might be when they ask you when something went wrong and how you fixed it or how you got over it. That seems to be like a very tricky sort of question because it's not so much about what went wrong. They just want to know how you reacted to it, or like how you, right? Like if they, hey, tell me one time where your team missed a deadline or something went wrong in your project and what you did. And if the candidate says something like, well, it was somebody's fault, they didn't follow, blah, blah, blah. Like I feel like that's one of those trick questions, right? When they ask you like something that went wrong and they're just trying to see how you reacted to it.
Yep. That's definitely a common one as well. So, what was a mistake that a team member might have made that impacted you, or what was a mistake that might have impacted the team and how'd you go about correcting it? Usually the question can come in different forms, but it's a type of question to get a sense of that person's self-reflection, as well as like, do they blame others versus putting not the blame, but like taking ownership of the mistake. So that's,
can you go too far into that though? Is there a line, like if you say, well, this went wrong, but I took care of it, I worked all weekend, like there's no work boundaries or anything, I worked for like 20 hours straight, didn't sleep, I worked on this, and I picked up somebody's slack and I did it for the, like, is there a line? Should somebody be watching for a line where it's like, okay, there's teamwork and then there's what you did, which is you overwork yourself for a week and burned out? Like, is that something that people have to watch out for? Like you don't want to get too much of a superhero complex?
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So I think the things to avoid in this is like, over contextualizing it to the point where you talk too much about the context, and then you start talking about how other people's mess ups or mistakes might have been involved in why you're doing extra work per se, or like you give too much context and then you end up spilling the beans on like, oh, the PM messed up on this part of the project, right? So like keep the context to what's relevant to, you know, the setting, which is a phone screen between you and a recruiter. So just knowing that, knowing the context there, like I don't need to know if your PM like was the reason why you're staying up all weekend to do this. But you know, if you had to do that, then that does show something good. I wouldn't hold that against someone if they like made a mistake and took a lot of time to like fix the mistake or provided that kind of like superhero complex, as long as they don't put people down while they try and make themselves look good.
I guess it's just prepping, right? Like you said, we keep going back to prepping for the interview, having that story ready so you don't have to make it up on the fly, having the details down, right? So like if you're ready to tell about a time when something went wrong, you want to make sure that you, like you said, that it's relevant, that you don't over contextualize it. You want to make sure that the way you tell the story, like it shines a light on you, but it doesn't like shun others, right? Kind of like say, well, we missed this deadline, and like, you know, we pulled as a team. I did some extra work to pick up some, like you might like, you want to think that the end of the story is you want to think about it ahead, so you don't spill the beans in the interview, right? You don't need to know it, memorize word by word, but you need to know where you're going with the story so that it goes your way.
Right? Agreed.
That seems to be. We're just going back to the same thing. It's like just prep for it. Like don't. I mean, because in your experience, you said you've been doing this for 6 years. How often would you say that somebody shows up to an interview just doing it on the fly? They have the zero prep. They just show up and be like, "This is going to be a conversation. You're just going to talk about stuff." How often do you think that happens?
Not often at all.
Really?
Not often at all. Like usually people prepare for it, or I'll try and give people some type of heads up so that they like know what to prepare for and do it on their own. So, you know, most of the time people do prepare. There have been times where people have come into technical interviews, did not even look at the prompt, and they kill it. But then that's also a weird signal if you let the team know, like, I didn't prepare for this interview. Like what type of point are you trying to make? So it's always good to prepare for the interview. 100%.
I had a friend that applied for a lot of junior roles, and they're all similar. When you're a junior applying for junior roles, they more or less similar. So they actually lost track of which company they were applying for. And when they got called in one of them, they're like, why do you want to work for us? And like, they totally like missed target the company, and like, we're talking about somebody else. So I think prepping is good. All right. Well, thank you, Harmeet, for all the advice that you gave today. I think there was a lot of golden nuggets there, a lot of good information. And if you have a few minutes, let's do some Q&A.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I'm going to check the chat. Let's see. Someone was asking, can you give some suggestion for improving logic building? So I'm assuming it, like in terms of logical answers or logical problems. Do you have any advice for getting better at those?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a pretty direct question. So Fede, Fede, I might need your help on this. So like how would that be applied to like, would that be like some type of data structures and algorithms question? I would assume like a logic-based question around data structures and algorithms.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it would be the kind of question where maybe you're given some data and you have to put it in a certain way, arrange it, or, you know, maybe follow steps that will get you there. Kind of like this sort of like 1, 2, 3 step where you have to logically think about how the pieces go in which order.
Yeah.
And how it all comes together.
Yeah. Okay. So this helps a lot. So one thing that I did there, right, was I wasn't too familiar about where the question was going. So I asked a clarifying question. So going back to it, ask clarifying questions. 1, just so you can get more context into any question that you're being asked. 2, I think it sounds very straightforward, but you want to think about things at a high level and then start to break them down to the details. So it's kind of like an onion. You want to get to the core of the question, like what is it that they're really trying to ask you, and kind of answer that at a more broad, general level, and then peel back the layers and talk about how your solution or however you're trying to approach the problem, and how you would do it step by step by step. So
Okay.
high level, break it down to the details.
High level, break it down to the details. Fair enough. Let's see. Let's keep going. Somebody asked, could you please share with us the main key to success facing a software developer interview? Is there like a one key to, I'm assuming that there's many, but do you think that there's like a common, maybe in your experience, you see some commonality across junior roles where it tends to be a key component or ingredient that everybody has or tends to have?
Yeah, I think the one that stands out the most is, think about it this way, like you're a junior developer, you're new to development, but you're also new to being on a team of developers. So one of the key things that I think will help you do well in interviews is just thinking out loud, being able to talk about your thought process out loud so that your team or the group of interviewers in the interview know like how you're approaching the problem. They can follow your train of thought and just kind of follow your thought process in general. And a lot of like when you go on to the other side and you get the job, you're going to be doing a lot of that as well, because you're going to have to explain your approach. And through that, you'll learn things from other developers, and other developers will be able to understand where they need to help you. So I would say practice thinking out loud is definitely going to help you in your interviews.
Definitely. It's I think that's one of the things that they always say, go to community and try to involve yourself with other people, because that's when you realize, oh, my code is not so self-explanatory as I thought. People keep asking me questions. What is this? What is that? Like, I think that's when it kind of like hits you. I have to be able to speak about my code. I have to be able to explain my thought process, because people, until I explain it, nobody knows, right? It's I think that's one of those things where getting involved online with projects and collaborating with others probably usually helps.
Definitely.
Let's see. Another question. Can you answer, are there problems? Nah. Okay, so this person is asking about, so foreigners working in the US, problems with recruiting foreigners. My English, I don't speak English perfectly. Let's say I want, okay, so I guess this person is asking, when your language, when there's a bit of a language barrier where you know enough English to apply for a job, you know enough English to maybe have a conversation, but you might not be at the conversational level of English where like we are having a conversation. Is that something that you need to worry about? Like, I mean, if you've made it to the phone screening interview, does that automatically mean that that they've decided that you're good enough anyways? Or can you still lose it in the phone interview if your English is just not coming across?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that kind of dives into a whole set of like how lenient the recruiter is. From my personal experience, I try to give as much of the benefit of the doubt when it comes to folks who, English isn't their first language, right? So what benefit of the doubt means to me is really like taking the chance to listen to every single word, how they say it, and try to listen to the relevant content. So I would say this, if you are not a fluent English speaker, don't let that deter you. I think by no means you should let that deter you. In fact, the recruiter is usually going to try even harder to really like meet you and understand where you're at in terms of your communication, how you're answering questions and things of that nature. So their odds are they're probably gonna, give you more benefit of the doubt because of the circumstances that you are dealt with, right? So I think that's a huge thing. I would say just because you made it to the phone screen though, doesn't mean you're good. You're good to go. So if English is your second language, everything that you're doing, like there's a common language that you and other folks on the recruiting teams and have, and that's the code, the things that you write, things that you work on, the projects, like those are the commonalities. So if you're able to speak to that pretty well, then you should be okay.
Great. And I think just to add to that, has a foreigner that I had to learn English as well. One thing that really helped me is you're really excited about the interview and you might have a lot of adrenaline going on. Slowing down, taking a deep breath. And this helps. This is both, not just foreigners. This is for native English speakers too. Slow it down and just a little bit. I'm not saying like comically slow, but doing a little slower, speaking a little slower, and just kind of like being mindful of how the words are coming out of your mouth. That can help a lot. And even if English is not your first language, if you're speaking a little slower and the interviewer can follow you what you're saying and you're just kind of like doing a bit of an effort, that can also help, because I know that sometimes you're just very excited, you start talking really fast and you have an accent and things just kind of like get lost in translation, like direct, like literally. So I think slowing down a little bit, just a bit, maybe practicing with somebody, that can help. Just speaking in general, like speakers in general. Let's see. I think I got this, but okay. So the person that asked the question said, I think I got this, just don't be afraid and ask some questions. Yeah, so don't be afraid, ask some questions. Yeah, so if you're worried about not just the interviewer not understanding you, but you not understanding the interviewer, I think it's fair to ask, to repeat the question. And that's just normal, I think.
For sure. Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask the interviewer. If you're finding trouble, finding the right word, maybe you can say like, you can even give more context behind what you're trying to describe, and maybe the interviewer can help you as well. So, I wouldn't think about it as like a one-way street there. Like, don't be afraid to ask the interviewer questions if you're unfamiliar with something.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying. It's like the interviewer is trying to be fair with you. So just, just as long as you're respectful and you're trying your best, it's going to work out.
Exactly.
Okay. Last question. What is your estimate on the weight of behavior versus technical interviews during the interview process? Is there a balance? If you ace the phone in screening, does that mean that you have a bit more leeway when it comes to the other side, or the opposite? Maybe you're not so good in the soft skills, but really strong technical. Is there like a 60-40, 30-70? Like, is there a balance there?
I wish there was an equation that I could just like send to everyone and they could follow that equation. Everything would be golden, but unfortunately there's not. I would say if you want to lean on one side, especially as a junior engineer coming in, you want to be leaning on the soft skills side more than the technical side. Like if there's like one preference, if I had to give one preference, it's the soft skills side. That being said, it really just depends. I wish there was a straightforward answer. For us, it's a mix of both. You can't be a very talented, brilliant engineer who has all the technical skills, but then soft skills, you have none of it. You're abrasive. You might come off with a chip on your shoulder. Your communication is terse. Like, that's not going to fly at Codecademy. Odds are that's not going to fly at most companies. There is opportunities for developers who are just really talented, but may not want to be in a team setting, and that's fine. But I would say 9 times out of 10, you need to have both skill sets. So honestly, it's about 50-50. If you don't have the relevant technical skills at all, depending on the rule, that might not work out for you. Even if your soft skills are really, really high, you got to have some baseline of the technical skills. So,
so it sounds like you can bomb either one. Like, you have to perform a certain minimum in either one, but as a junior role, it's sort of understood that your technical skills are on the lower end. That's why you're applying for a junior role. So the soft skills really have to shine through. They need to, I think somebody told me once, it was something like, they need to know that they can invest in your growth. Sort of like, you need to show that the technical skills that you don't have today, that if they teach you and they get through the process of the next 1 year, 2 year, so that you grow from your junior role, they need to know that they're doing that for the right reasons. Like, you are the right candidate for them to spend their time in teaching you, basically. It's kind of like, and I guess that's what shows in the soft skills. It shows that you are that person that has the growth potential and a good teammate, and somebody that is a solid person that is worth teaching. Is that why, like, kind of like the reasoning?
Exactly. Like, if for instance, like, this person doesn't take feedback well. that's not good, because then the whole time in your career as like a, first developer role, second developer role, like the whole time you're there, you're going to be given feedback. That's how you're going to grow at any level, right? So like if you're not able to take feedback well, that's not a good sign. And how are you supposed to help that person grow? Odds are it's going to be very difficult. So does it make sense for the company to invest time in this individual if they don't take feedback well?
All right. Well, oh, sorry, I interrupted. You want to finish the thought?
That being said, I think as long as you display that you can work within a team, you take feedback well, and you have a baseline of the technical skills, you should be good to go.
All right. Well, that was like a good 15 minutes of solid Q&A, and I like that. Well, that's the end for today. I think I've kept you here long enough, Harmeet. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom with all the learners. I'm sure that a lot of people are really nervous about job interviews, and I'm hoping that they get some useful information out of today. For everybody watching, we are going to be doing these every week. We're shooting for Monday at 3 p.m. every week. So tune in next week, check out our YouTube channel, Codecademy, and see you in the next recruiting video. Thank you, Harmeet.
See you. Take care, everyone.